Okay, let's see. We're up to the point of the feeding of the 5,000. And so um, I think we saw that it's a very interesting setup because the context of the whole thing is the Passover. So, I don't know if you've ever been shown that or seen that or noted that, but it's typical in our English way of thinking about things. Okay, so it's Passover. That's meaningless, right? It's just the Passover. No, if you're going to spend how many words was that? About at least 10. It costs them $500. Okay, maybe $50 at least. Times inflation times 2,000 years. That much money to put that in there. So he didn't just throw it in because he wants us to know it's Passover. It has to do with the entire argument, the entire logos, logical argument that he's going to make, that he's presenting to us. So it's an important and a key part. I don't remember ever having anyone, anywhere else really make a point of that. But we're going to see, if you remember, way back in the first chapter, second chapter, John, the immerser, says, "Behold the Lamb of God." Okay, and that's a setup. And Passover plays a huge role in John, the Gospel of John. Okay, here's one of those points. So we get to this chapter 6, or to the statement 7 and 6, that Philip concluded for himself 200 of denarii in bread will not ward them off. In loaves, literally in loaves, will not ward them off, in order that each one might take hold of a little. And I mentioned this is both a joke and a pun. It's a great one. Philip, from the response, we kind of get the idea that Philip, is not bright, but he is really bright. His response is almost like a joke. Well, it is a joke. It's a pun. He's not unsophisticated even in his thinking. Of course, his answer is not sufficient. But I did have a picture here. Oh, and I forgot. I should have brought. I don't have any denarii. They're pretty expensive to own. But this is. These are denarius from about that period in somebody's hand. They're about the size of a dime. Have you ever wondered how we got the dime? Well, a dime was probably equal to denarius in its period. Today, a dime's worth almost nothing, but that's inflation doing that. When you start spending fiat currency, you cause inflation. It's the government stealing our money. Anyway, the denarius is supposed to be equal to a day's wage. It was a silver Greek coin, and also, if you notice, these aren't Greek faces. These are mostly Caesars, mostly Romans. The Romans, the Greeks generally put gods on their coinage. So you have Athena, you have, Poseidon, different gods. I don't think they ever put Zeus on. Hespedes, whatever. They would put, generally you see Athena because Athens, right? We think of Greece as Greece, but Greece is not just Greece. There's Athenian Greece, there's Thracian Greece, there's Macedonian Greece. Each area in Greece, each city-state, each large city was a city-state into itself. As a matter of fact, Sparta, the Spartan League is a league of city-states. And Sparta was pretty powerful because it was a league of city-states of like-minded Greeks. So anyway, what's interesting about this is, okay, you notice on the money, all these, there might be one or two that doesn't have, but almost all of them have a face, and they're Caesars, and so who wouldn't be touching this money?
Sure.
Yeah, you're not supposed to be. Now, you have 4 areas. Remember the 4 different groups of the the rabbinic schools. You have the Galil, you have Jerusalem, you have Alexandria, and you have the Babylonian school. So there's 4 Jewish schools. And the main runners of those schools are the Pharisees. Now, the Pharisees are the ones who, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, the priests, right? The higher you are, the higher connected you are, the less likely you are to want to touch this money because, remember that, I don't know, I haven't talked about it for a while, but we know there was temple money. And the temple money, if you want to give your money to the temple, you are supposed to convert your money into temple for sacrifices. So you brought your denarii, right? Your money, or your lambs, your animals for sacrifice to the temple. And this is what Jesus kicked them out. Now, what you had to do is you had to convert your money into legal temple funds, right? Because you certainly can't take, you see what's happening here. So if I'm bringing money and not an animal, if I'm bringing an animal, I can, we'll take that for exchange. We'll give you a loan here, sign on the dotted line. You know, you just pay it off in a couple of years, maybe by month, right? And by the next Passover, you'll have it paid off and you're good. But we'll sell you the unblemished lamb. Now, most people didn't do that because legally, if you look back in the Old Testament, I don't think we've studied this much, but you legally could bring money or proto-money to the temple. The problem is that when you went to the temple, again, if you had proto-money or you had money like this, what did you have to do? Go to the money exchangers and get it turned into temple funds. Of course, they took their cut, and you suspect who was standing there in the court of Gentiles?
The Romans.
Yeah. So the Romans have tax collectors, and so when they see money, we think of taxes. Money's ubiquitous. To us, money is money, right? What they did is they took taxes in livestock and in stuff. But that's hard to do, right? And you don't really want to. You don't want to put your people in penury. You don't want to make them starve to death. But if they have money, what? Money's not like you can't eat it, right? The only thing you do, you can exchange it for food or whatever. But one of the big deals in the ancient world is if you have money, that meant I can easily pay tax, right? If the tax is 10% per year of this year, and you've got 10 denarii, oh, baby. Okay, I'm the tax collector, and I'm legal, and it's not like in our tax system, right? We have a tax system where you report your income per year, and they don't magically, well, not yet, they don't magically forget about it halfway through the year and say, oh, you owe again. They just take it out of your salary, right? Which is, I think, illegal. But anyway, in the ancient world, every time you walked through and you met the authorities, the presumption was, oh, okay, so you're bringing 10 denarii to the temple. And right there is the tax collector. And he goes, oh, okay, this is easy for me to figure out. You have 10, I take 1. That's for Caesar. And guess what? It has Caesar on it. Even though Jesus was making a point of give to Caesar what is Caesar's. Well, Caesar doesn't own anything. But guess what? Caesar took his tithe, took his part, right? And then, now, I suspect they did not want the temple funds. Any idea why?
No value anywhere else.
Yeah. There's the interesting thing about these temple funds, now they have some value in the Pharisaic quarter, because we know the Pharisees had their own market. There's a market up near the temple, and there was a market, supposedly the Pharisaic market in Jerusalem, that was down in the lower part of the city. So we suspect there was some value in, there was value there. But the problem with the Pharisaic market is, you think they'd let you in there if you weren't what? A Pharisee, right? I mean, okay, maybe they would. I mean, I think it's really funny, this ESG stuff and the things going with companies actually trying to get rid. You hear about Wells Fargo Bank, right, in Brownback? In our country, Wells Fargo Bank cut Brownback and all of his religious group away because they didn't like the religious message. And, Brownback's a Catholic, and they're trying to punish the Catholics. And I'm like, wait. No business turns away customers. That's insane. Why would you turn away customers? The presumption of capitalism is, that's why capitalism isn't racist or sexist or bigoted in any way, because you don't want to turn away people that are different skinned or different sex or different this or that, right? You're like, yeah, come on, I'm going to sell you my goods because you got money in your pocket or whatever, commodities trade. The problem though is, what about temple money? Temple money may have been, and we don't know, may have been like a fiat currency, right? Only valuable in the Pharisaic market, well, maybe not even valuable in the Pharisaic market. The Pharisees used something, but we don't know what they use. We don't have enough data. There's not enough written down. But the value of the temple money may have been nothing, right?
Did it have any intrinsic value?
Well, so what happens
Made out of silver?
after people bring that money?
Well, see, they could trade it for temple goods, right, and services.
So what was the temple money made of?
Well, there is, and I think I had some pictures of temple money. We believe it was lower value type stuff. If you remember, we believe that there is not enough data. I want there to be more data, but there's just not enough data for this, right? Because people don't write down the normative stuff. It costs way too much to write this stuff down. As a matter of fact, I got to throw this out before I forget it. Tammy noted this to me. She was reading, I can't remember she's reading in Paul's letters. And you notice in almost all of Paul's letters, instead of writing a letter, what does he say? I am going to send my servant. I'm going to send a slave. I'm going to send my friend to tell you. Why?
Cheaper.
Yeah, it's way cheaper to send somebody with a message. If you're just telling them, hey, he's okay, he's doing all right, he's living on Lycander Street over here, right, near the Asclepion, it's all cool. That's a lot cheaper than having a libraeus come to your house and write you a letter that costs you $20,000, $10,000. Even a short missive may cost you $5,000, and the book slave, the person to go with it, right, and take it. So if you just tell somebody, and she said, isn't this a proof of what you say about how, if Paul's going to send him a letter, do you think he's going to send him a short note? No, it's way too expensive to send a short note. But if I tell, hey, Judy, when you go to Thessalonica, how about telling those guys that everything's okay with me, right? And I know you're going there. So, yeah, right? So I thought that was really interesting observation, because that's a beautiful observation. But we get to this thing about the money. We do know that temple funds, the biggest problem with the temple stuff is, when you went into the temple, right, do you think you gave money? Remember Josiah, that the priests were stealing from the money, right, in the coffers back in the Old Testament era. And so he set up the trumpets. He set up the trumpets. We believe they were opposite, like not open trumpets like the ones you roll money in, but trumpets that were like this. And remember the widow's mite? And she put in a lepton. We believe leptons may have been made out of iron. Most likely not temple funds. You think the temple wants temple money? No way. want money they can spend other places. So Josiah made them do these strong boxes for them so the priests wouldn't steal it. But probably by this time, well, we know who was borrowing it. As a matter of fact, we know that Pilate really irritated the Jews because he took temple funds and used it to build an aqueduct, I think, and something else. So he thought he was doing the public good because he knew the priests were stealing all the money anyway, right? So the point is this. We don't know how much of a fiat currency the temple money was, but we suspect it was you can only use it in the temple. And even the Pharisees probably wouldn't touch this stuff. They may have had their own funding. It's just, we don't know, right? You find some stuff like this, but the Pharisees couldn't touch this. How do you think the Pharisees use this money?
This one?
Yeah.
The real currency?
Yeah.
They'd have a servant.
Yeah, exactly. They have a servant. And this is the world of non-ubiquitous money was this way anyway. So if you were wealthy enough to have real money, remember the Samaritans? They got paid in booze, well, beer and bread, right? Because money is not ubiquitous. But somebody who has money has the ability to have a slave. It's okay if your slave is touching this stuff, right? No badness on you. Just saying. Remember, the slaves could break the law, which was, by the way, illegal. Remember, it says in the Torah, remember the Torah said, and your servants shall follow? Well, they would have servants, though, that would do things that allowed them to break the law. Remember, you're not supposed to travel further than whatever, but there was a law, and I try to remember, it's right in the Mishnah, in the Talmudic sources, but they would allow them, remember, they could walk anywhere in Jerusalem because they put a rope around it, and therefore it was an enclosed courtyard. They also had this rule that you could travel as far as to a meal, I think is what they said. So what you did is you had your servants go ahead and put meals at certain places so you could travel all the way and eat your meal, and that was, just you were not.
You're following the letter of the law.
You're following kind of the letter-ish of the law, right? This is Talmudic, but not, remember, the Talmud is not supposed to overrule the Torah, but there was things going on. Anyway.
I wonder how they set the exchange rate.
I'm sure it was not very positive.
Not favorable.
Matter of fact, it was so non-positive. Remember old Jesus? Jesus used corporal punishment, or talked about corporal punishment. He was totally in favor of everything the Torah said. The Torah said, if somebody murders, you put them to death. Jesus would agree. They didn't have to write that in the New Testament. Jesus went on to take a cat of nine tails. Where he saw it in John, he took a cat of nine tails and he applied corporal punishment on the buyers and sellers in the temple by beating them. And he also said in Matthew that if you teach a person, if you try to change the Torah, even a jot or a tittle, or teach a child to do not likewise, that you should have a millstone tied around your neck and placed into the ocean, into the sea.
Actually, it'd be worse for you than that.
Yeah. Worse than, right? Yeah. So Jesus obviously, and God supports corporal punishment for mistraining the youth, children, and for also murder, and I'm just saying, I'm really amazed all the time about the Catholic Church's position on this because I think it's silly. But, what I'm trying to show you is the understanding of this. By the way, Philip's comment about this is pretty flippant, right? I told you it's a pun. He goes, 200 of denarii in bread, in loaves, will not ward them off. He's not exaggerating. He's probably a good accountant, maybe, right? But he's making a statement that what is he saying to Jesus? It is impossible. This is a Greek way. In Hebrew, there is a word for infinity, right? I can't remember what his right had, but there is a word for infinity. There is a word for a period of time. Yom olim. Olim means infinity. Yom means a period of time. Yom can be a day, it can be a year, it can be a month, it can be a season, it can be a messianic age, but it's a limited time. The Greeks did not, if you remember, the Greeks and Romans, all those guys did not have a concept of zero. They also did not really have a concept of infinity in the way that we do, or even the Hebrews do. There is no word for it in their language per se. There's no word. You have to make a thing. This right here in Greek is a beautiful euphemism for a long. It's just like 40 days and 40 nights in Hebrew means a long period of time. You wouldn't say olim, infinity, right? But you'd say it's a long period of time, 40 days and 40 nights. So I was interesting that in the reading today in the Old Testament, that Moses went into the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights. It's more than you can count, right? Anyway, also in the silver pennies, I thought it was interesting in the King James Bible, the penny was the equivalent of the daily wage. Inflation has made a penny worth almost zero, but that's inflation, even in Britain. And pennies, by the way, in copper were really big. Tuppence and pennies, just that was because the value of the copper had to be equal to the value, the value of the penny was always greater than the value of the copper in the penny, but the equivalent of a currency means it has value. Not intrinsic value, but value. Anyway, there are silver pennies. Okay, now, this, I've got a better picture, but this is pretty good. I found this. This is probably the way the loaves were. Not necessarily because it was near Passover, but because of what? Why would the loaves look like this? Even if it's not, it's close to Passover, so they probably aren't as puffy as this. Anybody been to the Middle East? Turkey, those areas? You ever ordered bread in a Turkish restaurant? What do you get?
Pita.
Right, yeah.
You get this. It's not bread that's it's not matzah. It's not bread without rising yeast. It's not a non-yeast bread, but it is a flat bread and it's really good. It comes out piping hot out of the oven, and they usually give you raw butter. Oh, so good, so good. But anyway, this is probably what the loaves and fishes look like.
More robust, too. You don't have to worry about it getting squished in your bag.
Not much. However, when it does get, after it, one of the problems, by the way, one of the reasons that they kind of invented loaves that are the loaves like we do is because the surface area of this is too great. So what happens over time is it dries out pretty fast. And so if you have bread, and okay, if you've been to Italy or France or those places, what are you eating in the morning? The bread that was left over from the previous night. And the reason it's edible or good is because the outside is hard, the inside is soft. So the bread, when it comes out of the bake in the night, in the evening, is soft all around. But in the morning, it's hardened on the outside, which makes it portable and also edible. This kind of bread, because it's got so much surface area, it begins to dry out pretty quick and it doesn't have a lot of softness in the middle. So, yeah, there's just interesting things about culture. We can talk about olive oil versus butter, too. I'll mention it, just have to say it. Okay, butter. The Greeks call barbarians butter eaters, and the Romans did too. You know why? Romans and Greeks they used butter for wounds and for lubrication, like lubricating, wood and stuff, because they thought butter was an inferior product. The problem with butter is butter in Mediterranean climates that are warmer than the northern climates goes bad more quickly. So formic acid, it actually will make pretty good stuff. Even with formic acid, you can eat it, but it's not as tasty. So where they ate olive oil, and that was their culture, the northern barbarian tribes, those rascally European types, would take milk and make butter out of it. And of course, they were butter eaters. They were barbarians. So another word for, and by the way, why do you think, what did Barbaros mean in Greek? A barbarian. What's a barbarian in Greek? Could not speak Greek. If you can't speak Greek, you're a barbaros. The problem with the Romans and the Greeks is with Koine Greek and Roman, I can no longer call a barbarian a barbaros if they can't speak Greek, right? If you're Latin and you're using Greek and you go, oh, you're a barbaros because you don't speak what? Greek? What do you speak? Latin. You just called everybody barbarians. You can't do that. So over time, that became butter eaters. So if you're a butter eater, anyway, cultures and languages are just amazing me. So here we next one. 8. Another of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. It's important that he is Simon Peter's brother. That's interesting. And he's speaking up because Philip got it wrong, right? So Philip obviously screwed the pooch. Basically, he did not give the right answer that Jesus was. Maybe Jesus, it doesn't tell us, right? But maybe Jesus, rolled his eyes. Or rolled his eyes. Oh, come on, Philip, right? One of the disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said unto him, the guy, he makes a logical argument to him. So it was thoughtful. Highest one from out among the Matheon, the learners, out of him, Andrews, of the sibling of the same womb, Adelphos. Just saying his brother is not as quite the same as saying he's Adelphos. Sibling of the same womb, Semenos. And I think he's also relating to the disciples themselves, because he's calling, if you remember in Hebrews, we studied Hebrews, the big deal was they called all the people, right? Siblings of the same womb under Christ. And so I think that it's interesting that they're specifying Simon Peter's brother. The insinuation is that they are a band of brothers. I don't know, right?
Biological brothers?
What?
You're saying biological brothers?
Well, this is specifying that they're biological brothers, but I think the impression is already they are,
A brotherhood?
a brotherhood, a group, right? It's an insinuation there, I think. Andrew, one from out of the disciples, the sibling of the same womb of Simon Peter, makes a logical argument to him. And here's his logical argument. So this is really interesting, because where Philip has got his ledger down and he's making marks on the ground, right? And figuring out how much it's going to cost. And here Andrew is solving the problem. Here's a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish, but how far will they go among so many? Remember, it says Jesus was testing them, giving them a trial, right? And so this is interesting. It makes you wonder if this is this a joke too? You know what I'm saying? Is it okay? Obviously, Jesus is not happy. Do you see this? He's not happy. He wants to test the disciples. The people he's got 5,000 men and a whole bunch of women and children. They're hungry. They followed him. Jesus wants to solve a problem. Matter of fact, was this really his problem to solve? No. This is interesting in itself. I told you the gods don't feed the people feed the gods. But here we have a God whose interest is the comfort of the people. I think there's more to it than that. we're going to see that. But he is sadly disappointed. He brings it up as a problem. And what do his disciples do? Philip gives him figures. Here's a spreadsheet. Andrew says, hey, I found this kid. He's got, and why with the kid? That's interesting in himself. You know, you think the kid is hungry, right? And he's going to eat his scarf as lunch where nobody else is watching. Why did he know? I mean, the information, it's not like this information is, the impression we have is this information is close hold, but it's obviously not close hold. It's not close hold because somebody is looking out or trying to figure out if there's food, right? And Jesus is probably the guy who started the whole thing. Do the disciples care? Maybe they don't want to be strung up with a pitchfork, right? So, you know, you got 5,000 guys and a whole bunch of women and children, and they're hungry. What are we going to do about it? Well, I don't know. Hey, Simon Peter, you know, should we run? What do you think? Right? Just saying. There's a lad here which have 5 barley loaves and 2 small fishes, but what are they among so many? Pedarion, a little boy, in the same spot, Hos, he holds 5 artos, loaves, Krinthios, consisting of barley, and 2 opsaria. And opsaria is an interesting word. Literally, it's like, I don't know if you have kimchi the way I've had kimchi. Kimchi is not just kimchi, right? I love kimchi. But if you go to a real Korean restaurant, they'll give you like 10 different types of little kimchi. You go to, what's that?
Yeah, banchan. They're called their little side dishes, like little pickles or radishes or bean sprouts or all sorts of different things, fermented this or that.
Yeah, and even little fishies.
Sometimes depends. Like they can make little fish cakes and other things like
Well, I've had actual little fishies.
that. Oh, really?
Little dried fishies, yeah.
I haven't.
Which are, they're really good. They're little. So you eat the whole thing there, you're like, okay, I'm eating all the guts and everything, you know. But they're dried and they're actually pretty good. In Japan, you can get something similar when you order sake. And when you go to any fancy place and you order sake, they'll give you a little dish of something to eat with your sake. And sometimes it's little
It's
fish.
like peanuts in a bar here.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, it's to get like they're salty and they have
Well, as a matter of fact, okay, I've got to go on a little bit of rabbit trail. In Asian cultures, the rice is the meal. Everything else is called a side dish. So even if you have curry with your rice, the curry is a side dish. And in the Korean culture, the side dishes are the little fermented things. The rice is the meal. And you may even have bulgogi with your rice, but it's still considered, you know, a side dish because the meal is rice. Rice is what you eat when you're in Asian cultures in general. Anyway, but this opsaria means relishes for other food. So the main meal is obviously the bread, and the bread is barley bread. I told you about barley bread. The thing you do with barley bread is you make beer out of it because nobody eats barley bread, right? But he has some barley bread, and he has these 2 little fish that are relishes to other food. So the translation, contrariwise these which what S and R into, so that's this. A little boy is in the same spot who holds 5 loaves consisting of barley and 2 relishes to other food, small fish. Contrariwise, what are those to so vast as this? And here's another picture. This is the reason I like this picture is the other one had wheat bread. This is barley bread. It looks really different, doesn't it, than the other kind of bread? Because it is. And all right, you know, we should probably make some barley bread and wheat bread and taste it and see the difference. Now, modern barley bread probably is not too bad, but if you went and had somebody make it the way that you had to make it in the ancient world, I think that you would not be very happy with it. Because one of the biggest things about barley versus wheat is when you shuck wheat, right? Or shuck it, not shuck it, when you willow wheat, right?
Yeah.
When you
Fresh.
Thresh it.
when you thresh it, the wheat, the way you do it is you throw it up in the air and the chaff blows away. The problem with barley is what? It's hard to get rid of it because barley is kind of a complete, that's why it's like this. And that's why in the ancient world it was so unpopular, is because today we have ways of threshing rice. In the ancient world, they couldn't do that. Rice was always brown in the ancient world. White rice is rice that has been milled. Barley has to be milled to get to a consistency of modern barley bread. Just saying. So anyway, the world has changed a lot. It's a little bit different. And here we go with Jesus. Jesus said, have the people sit down. There was plenty of grass in that place. And they sat down. About 5,000 men were there. What's interesting is they found a place with grass. Remember, it's high. It's in the mountains. Anybody know about the mountains in Syria? The mountains just about anywhere else, right? What happens when you go up in the mountains?
Rocky.
Cold, rocky. Yeah. I mean, there's not a lot of arable land, but here there was, probably a grazing area. If we had our map, if we went there, we might be able to figure out exactly where this is. Because a mountain with grass can't be that common in this area, right? Pretty arid area. What's interesting, though, is not just the words that are used, but the words that in the Greek itself. Jesus said, make the men sit down. Make the men sit down. There was much grass in the place, so the men sat down in number about 5,000, but they didn't sit down exactly. He said to Jesus, Poisate, you make or do the anthropos, man, face, humans or men, anapaesian, to fall back, to recline. Recline. It was but chortos, the place where grass grows, chortos. It's basically a meadow, high meadow. Where grass grows and animals graze, herbage, polis, much or many, into the topo, to a spot, and it passed, they fell back accordingly. The men, the Andres, the Artemon, a number which about 5 times 1,000. Now, I really love this in the ancient, we don't, okay, if we say 5,000, it's 5,000, right? That's our numbering system. But a lot of older numbering systems in the ancient world especially, they couldn't do it quite the way that we do it. They would do 5 times 1,000. Penta Kiskiliarion, whatever. So 5 times 1,000, just like 5 plus 1 in Greek is 6. Pretty cool. Anyway, Jesus said, you make the men to fall back to recline. But it was a large place where grass grows and animals graze. Accordingly to the spot they fell back, recline. The men, the number of which, how 5 times 1,000. Okay, what was Jesus telling them to do, and what was Jesus setting up here? Any idea?
So you recline to eat.
You recline to eat. So number one, he's telling them to recline, and that presumes you're going to eat. Now, the other thing is in Greek thought. Okay, that's Hebrew and Roman and ancient world thought. If I tell you to recline, I'm going to feed you. Okay, otherwise I would just say sit down, right? What's the other thing that a Greek does when they recline? What's Greek and recline go together for? Eating, drinking, reclining. You are in a Greek symposium. It's a Greek symposium. What's a symposia? You can go to a symposia. We have symposia, science. I go to, every year I go to at least one symposia. Back when I was in the Air Force, I went to like maybe 5 a year because the Air Force would pay for me to go to symposia and give papers. But you go to symposias to give papers, and in the Greek world, when you had a symposia, you reclined, you ate and drank, and you discussed what? Philosophy. Well, what is Jesus setting up here? It's a very interesting situation because he's telling them to recline, the presumption he's going to feed them, but to the Greek worldview, what does it mean when a whole bunch of people recline together? We're going to listen. We're not just there to eat and drink. We're not just there, it's not the bar scene. It's not the Last Supper, right? The Last Supper, they reclined around a table. Okay? In this case, Jesus told them to recline. So obviously, okay, what are the disciples thinking? Oh man, what if we can't deliver? These people are gonna kill us, right? They're expecting food, and by the way, it is really interesting that he said, okay, you can take this, both, King James and the NIV basically, specify the men sit down, okay? The men to recline, not sit down, to recline. So there's also presumption here in Greek and Roman kind of thought that, hey, who's going to get taught? You're going to get taught. Because he doesn't say, now I know, ladies, don't take too much umbrage about this because I don't think there is any here, but if you tell the women and children to sit down, right, you're saying, you're here for dinner. But if you just tell the men to sit down, you're telling them that, what are you here for? Symposium. Yeah. So I think there is a reason for this. It's a cultural reason. I think it's pretty important to note that. Jesus then took the loaves. Gave thanks, distributed to those who were seated as much as they wanted. He did the same with the fish. Okay, and then there's the Greek. And Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed to the disciples to them that were set down, and likewise of the fishes as much as they would. Okay. Here's the Greek Elaban. He took hold of, he grasped hold of, certainly accordingly, he grabbed hold of the loaves, Jesus did, and Eucharistes. Eucharist. He having been grateful, good gratefulness. This is from the word, charis, and it's Eucharistus, good charis, right? So charis is usually, that's the word, charis, charo, hey, right? But it adds to it good grace. He had been good gratefulness. He gave throughout a crowd to the anakimenos, reclining, similarly, and from out or from among of the osparion, the fishes, in singular it means relish, in plural anyway, it's the relish, right? Hosen, as is, they willed or desired, ithelion. So everybody got all the food they wanted. And this is, I should have put in here, this is a double entendre. It's a pun. It's a beautiful pun. Okay? According, Jesus took hold of the loaves, and he having been grateful, good gratefulness, he gave throughout the crowd to the reclining, and similarly from out of the fishes, as much as they willed or desired. Okay. It's not just the food. What else did they get?
Quantity, a lot.
Well, not just the food, though. Like I said, this is a pun. This is a Greek pun. Remember, the original pun was started by Philip. And they said to Philip, hey, Philip, you're going to... The first thing he said, Philip concluded for himself, 200 denarii in loaves will not ward them off, in order that each one might take hold of a little. And I told you that's a pun. It's a pun of food, and it's a pun on ideas or thoughts. And so, how do I know this? Because Jesus didn't just say, hey, sit on the ground, everybody, I'm going to give you something to eat. He said, recline like a symposium. And then he provided them food. And the presumption is that Jesus didn't give it to them himself. How do you provide them the food? Through the disciples, right? Through the learners. But not just food. What else did he give them? Teaching. Yeah. Answers. Now, we want to know what the answers were. Guess what the answers were? It was about the Passover. The Passover. What? Remember, it said it was the time of the Passover. That's a indication to us about what Jesus' whole point is here. And so what do you do in a Passover Seder? You recline, you get the bread, instead of lamb, they had fishes, they had relish. Wait, you guys never done a Seder? What do you have? You have the boiled eggs, you have the relish, right? Bitter herbs.
Water, then like the sweet apple.
What herbs did they have? No, they weren't eating them. The grass. It uses the word. It doesn't use the word for, it uses the word chorizo. That sure sounds like the word for bitter herbs. It's a place of herbs. It's a place where animals graze, right? I'm just telling you, okay, there's all kinds of really cool euphemistic stuff that we are seeing in this. The point is that as we look at what is happening culturally, we are seeing a replay of the Passover. Not just the Passover, the manna in the wilderness, right? The manna in the wilderness, God provided the children of Israel with manna and with quail eventually. Jesus gave them, a non-sacrificial animal, which is interesting in itself, right? Fish, as a relish with their manna. And he fed them all. And the trick or the unstated telos in this is that it wasn't just, because he made them recline in a symposium, it wasn't just the food that he was giving out. That's right. How do we know this? Go back and look at Matthew and Mark. I think it's Matthew and Mark yourselves about this circumstance. And I think, remember, he put the men in groups, and that is even a stronger indication. John, because of his audience, doesn't believe that he needs to give us that much detail. But the other disciples, the other writers of the Gospels, basically put even more detail in about, and I should have probably quoted some of that, but, in their accounts, Jesus was obviously talking to the people, giving information to the people, where John says, I don't need to go to that detail. I don't need to spend extra money in writing my missive, my gospel, because every person here is listening to this knows exactly what's going on, right? Everybody here has gone to a Greek symposium, right? That's the expectation, I think.
Yeah, it's in Mark that it says they sat down in groups by hundreds and fifties.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and I think, remember when I taught Mark, and I mentioned specifically, the only reason you would do that is to be able to discuss the subject. Anyway, and Mark, Mark writing, I believe, to a very strong Hebraic audience, as opposed to John writing to a very strong Latin and Greek audience, right? It's the difference in culture, right? He's got to explain this. Anyway, when they had had enough to eat, he said to the disciples, gather the pieces that are left over, let nothing be wasted. This is interesting in itself. I mean, this is also paralleled in the other Gospels. Like I said, they're not synoptic. They're logos to tell us. When they were filled, he said to the disciples, and again, this is dual meaning. Filled. Filled with what? Filled with knowledge, filled with food. He said to the disciples, and by the way, how do you know this? Okay, I don't know how many of you ever have eaten a meal with a family, right? Does it really matter about the meal? No, you sit at the table until you're done talking, right? Right? You know, and if somebody gets up early, in our culture, you're supposed to excuse yourself, because nobody does that anymore. But, you know, you just don't get up from the table and go. You know, you say, hey, Mom, Dad, I got to go do my homework. Or, Billy Bob, go do your homework. Or whatever, right? You just don't. Usually, when you're having constructive conversation at the table, people might stay there for what? Forever. And have coffee and have dessert and everything, right? Because that's what you do. I've got my kids here. And, you know, that's what we do. You know, everybody's still around the table. Okay, what are we going to do? What games are we going to play? You know, just yakking about stuff. But anyway, they were filled. He said, it says, gather up the fragments that remained, enough to be lost. Here is in the great, plus which what? But day. In a pleistasian, they were filled in. They were filled in. Not necessarily that they were sated. They were filled in. He makes a logical argument to the learners, to the disciples of him. Look at this word. Sine gatete. You lead together. You lead together the having superabounded, clamdamata, the pieces, in order that may, not or least, a certain one or thing may be destroyed fully. Okay. Just the words in the Greek should point out to you this is not just about food. Okay? Here's what the translation is. But which how they were filled in. But which how they were filled in. He makes a logical argument to his disciples. You lead together, be having superabounded pieces in order that anything may not be destroyed fully. In other words, what were the disciples doing when they were collecting the leftovers? Talking with the people and ensuring that the people understood the point of the message. The problem is, we want the message, right? We want Jesus to give us the message. Well, guess what? John thinks he already did. John thinks he already told you what the message was going to be by telling you this is about the Passover.
It comes a little more full circle later in the chapter.
Yes.
And more explanation, getting deeper.
Back to the harvest. He was telling him earlier about the harvest. We planted it, now harvest.
Now harvest. And, you know, okay, here's our problem. Remember, I told you, Greek is not generally about euphemism. Greek is about concrete. And so if we read the Greek concretely, I think we'll get the most out of the message. But at the same time, Greek has some great euphemistic stuff in it. And our writer is giving us direction or instruction pointing that way.
I'm just kind of stepping back in an outline form. I mean, John's talking about all the different signs Jesus did. Well, the first sign was involving wine. Now, this sign is involving bread. It's got fish too, but the fish is the main point. So we've got two really familiar key elements going on here in these signs that are kind of pointing forward to a Passover and a different kind of future usage of those elements.
And as Aristotle says, don't make sure that your plot is simple enough that the reader or the hearer, the seer, can keep it in their brain for the entire time. And like I said, our plot level is about, 36 seconds or something, right? Where the Greeks could handle a thought for maybe an hour or two. Just saying. So yeah, you go back and the plot here is about food and food in the context of God. Because remember, Jesus said, I'm God. So guess what Jesus is doing? He's doing God-like miracles, real God-like miracles. Like I said, in the ancient world, the gods didn't make food for people. The people brought the food to the gods. Here we have Jehovah who made food for the people. And now, in the Passover, he gave them the Passover lamb, right, to represent passing over death. Now we have Jesus having a symposium on a mountainside, and the end words here, you would just not expect these words. You would not expect it to say, okay, in order that anything may not be destroyed fully. Why would you say that, even in Greek, unless you meant it? You see what I'm saying? I mean, I would use there's a lot of other ways I could express this in Greek, but he didn't just say, okay, pick up all the pieces so that we can have them. Or we can, have leftovers, right? He didn't say that at all. He uses this very, very direct word. And by the way, this word, apoletei, that we're going to see that word used over and over again, because this is a word that's used for killing or for destroying or ending. Yes, sir.
It makes me think of, he's telling them, don't waste this opportunity.
It's kind of like the Samaritan woman, right? The Samaritan woman, she understood. She got it. She didn't just understand the concrete message that Jesus was telling her. She understood the underlying message. We're expecting the Christ, the Messiah. And he says, well, I am. He told her, right? He didn't tell the disciples. He didn't tell anybody else. He didn't tell Nicodemus. He told her. Okay. I mean, this is just pretty cool stuff. And like I said, this irony is a Greek figure of speech. The words use it by specific, not purely appropriate to the comment. They are not. This is a test and a logical argument to the disciples about the message and the people. Lead together the remnant so they may not be lost. It's not just the food, the remnants. It's the people. And the word here, the word used, synagogue, synagogue, right? Remember, the Christians called theirs ecclesias, because they were like the Greek Athenian ecclesia, the Democrat, gathering. It was a self-gathering, a called-together gathering. The synagogues were what? Led by a leader. That's why they're called synagogues. Synagogue in the Greek means to lead together. Pretty wild they use that term right there. Just beautiful. It's obvious that they're not just talking about food. Let's see, did I miss something here? So they gathered them and filled 12 baskets and the pieces of 5 barley loaves left over by those who had eaten. 12 baskets. And let's see.
So Jesus had sent the disciples to the breakout sessions to be sure that everybody got it.
Yes. In our terms, matter of fact, it's somebody should write business and management according to Jesus, and I think they would probably make $1 million. Maybe I should write that. That seems like a great title to me. Something I'm not kind of writer usually. Therefore, they gathered them together and filled 12 baskets with the fragments of the barley loaves which were made over and above. Then the Eden synagogue. They led together. Certainly accordingly, and they filled entirely, dodeke, 2 and 12, kophinos, large baskets of pieces from out or among of the 5 loaves, the krinithon of consisting of barley, what they were superabounded to those having eaten, they having eaten. Accordingly, they led together and filled entirely 2 and 10 large baskets of pieces from out of the 5 loaves consisting of barley, which were superabounded to those having eaten. And just at the end part here, I'll show you the picture. This is an actual large basket from the period. Here is a picture of a large basket that they used in that time. Yeah, we got fishermen there, but this is a picture, scale picture, so you can see that's a lot. That's a lot. Okay, and those are little fishies. That's the relish. The relish. Thank you, Father, for your word. We pray you look at this this week. In your name we pray, amen.
If anyone did get coffee because it wasn't